All right, let's get right into it. We're going to unpack the hidden machinery in our brains, the stuff that makes us judge people in a split second. Think of this as your new toolkit for understanding stereotypes and those snap judgments we all make.
I mean, of course you have, right? We all do it. You see someone on the street or maybe in a meeting or even just online, and boom, your brain just instantly cooks up a story about who they are. But where does that story even come from? And let's be honest, how often is it completely wrong? So there's actually a name for this. It's called thin slicing. The author Malcolm Gladwell really popularized the term. It's basically our brain's shortcut, making these super fast, almost automatic calls based on just, well, a thin slice of information. It's a survival thing, for sure, but man, it can also lead to some huge mistakes.
It is wild how easily our brains get tripped up by what we see on the surface. You might remember that old Carlsberg ad where couples walk into a movie theater and it is just jam-packed with these really tough-looking bikers, and their first reaction is pure fear. They thin slice the whole situation and just want to get out of there. But the twist, of course, is that they're completely wrong, which just goes to show how our first impression is often just a mirror of our own biases. So the big question is, how do we fight back against our own faulty wiring? Well, the very first tool in our kit is all about learning to challenge our own assumptions before they totally take over. And to get a handle on this, we're going to look at a really simple but incredibly powerful little story. It's called The Cookie Thief. And it's just a perfect example of how we can be so sure about something that is 100% wrong. Okay, so picture this. A woman's at an airport, she buys a bag of cookies, sits down, and the guy next to her just starts eating them. Can you imagine? She is furious. So she starts eating them too, kind of passive-aggressively, right? Each cookie is like this little act of war. The tension is just building. Finally, she gets on the plane, opens her purse, and, oh, there's her own bag of cookies, untouched. She was the cookie thief the whole time. You know, what this story really hammers home is a lesson we forget all the time. Our perception is not always reality. The woman's anger was totally real, but the reason for it? It was a complete fiction she'd made up in her own head. So the cookie story is one thing, right? It's pretty low stakes. But what happens when our thin slicing plugs into much deeper, way more damaging biases in society? What happens when our assumptions are tied to something like race? There's a story called The Elevator Ride that explores this exact thing. A character gets into an elevator, their heart starts pounding, they're filled with fear when another person gets in with them, and that fear is based entirely on racial stereotypes. It's a powerful look at how cultural conditioning can set off a real, physical response based on absolutely nothing but a learned prejudice. And this is where the story gets so much bigger. These aren't just random, isolated thoughts floating around in our heads. Our individual biases are actually fed and reinforced by huge social systems. Sociologists have names for these systemic biases, and you've probably seen them all in action. There's ageism, which pushes older people to the margins. There's lookism, the preference for attractive people in jobs and other settings. And then there's racism, which uses race to build and maintain social power structures. And this is the really crucial part to get. These isms aren't just a bunch of people's bad opinions. No, they are woven right into the fabric of our society, from how people are shown in the media to who gets hired for a job. They are systems of bias. If you've ever seen the 2004 movie Crash, it just nails this idea. It follows a bunch of different people in Los Angeles whose lives all intersect, and we see them get judged by stereotypes over and over, like a Hispanic locksmith who's just trying to do his job, but people see him as a criminal, or a successful Black film director who gets racially profiled by the police. But the film's really tough lesson is that the same person can be a victim of prejudice one minute and then turn around and be the perpetrator the next. Okay, so we've looked inside our own heads at our assumptions, and we've looked out at the social systems around us. So for this final part, we're going to bring it all back home and explore how all those external judgments actually shape who we think we are. About 100 years ago, a sociologist named Charles Horton Cooley came up with this really powerful idea he called the looking glass self. The concept is simple, but it's pretty profound. Basically, it's that we don't see ourselves directly. Instead, our sense of who we are is a reflection of how we imagine other people see us. He broke it down into 3 little steps. First, we imagine how we look to other people. Second, we imagine what they're thinking, how they're judging us. And third, we feel something based on that imagined judgment. Pride or embarrassment, shame, confidence. Our entire identity is built in this social mirror.
And if you need a modern example, just look at your own social media profile. Seriously, is that perfectly curated grid of happy moments the unfiltered, real you? Or is it a version of you that's been designed to get a positive judgment in that looking glass, to get the likes, the approval, the validation? This whole effect was captured so perfectly in Dove's Real Beauty Sketches experiment. In it, women describe themselves to a forensic artist from behind a curtain. And then, a stranger who had just met them for a few minutes described them to the same artist. The results are just staggering. The sketches based on the women's own descriptions were consistently harsher, way more critical. The strangers saw them in a much more forgiving, positive light. That's the looking glass self in action. It shows how the judgments we imagine from others are often way tougher than the reality.
Which, of course, brings us to the final and most critical question. We've seen how our brains take shortcuts, how society bakes in these biases, and how all that noise distorts the way we even see ourselves. So, knowing all this, how on earth do we begin to wipe the mirror clean, to start seeing not just other people, but also ourselves, with a little more clarity and a little more compassion?